Bart and I were like, oh, it'd be really good to get more of the thinking out. And then we're like, oh, let's do a recorded Zoom call and then let's provoke some of the questions that we could talk about so that we don't just sit there and go, oh yeah, what do we do on the board? So that was the loose idea. Let's just get a few questions, talk about some stuff and generate a bit of discussion and share as much information and context as possible. And just real fucking simple, record the Zoom and use it as a resource and could be useful for the incoming board and others that are interested in talking about minimal viable governance. So that was the background. I don't know if we want to start with a quick round of chickens and hellos or if we just want to just get straight into it.
I'm on quite a tight schedule, so quick would suit me, even though I know that's, breaking the first rule of Enspiral.
Works good for me as well.
Cool. Well, let's just smash into it gently. So how do we want to do this, I guess? But have you got any thoughts on kicking it off?
Yeah, I think so. Part of this was, I guess, also just wanting to try and consolidate some of the learnings that aren't part of the processes, I guess, and also articulate some of the kind of ever-growing clarity of the role and questions that you guys have. No process in mind. I guess maybe a couple of questions, or we could set up a few questions and roll through them. I think would be a good start.
Yeah, just to add a little catchphrase on that, I'd say it's like, it's the silence between the notes that makes the music. And so it's all of the stuff that happens in between the words in the handbook and the processes in the financial agreement that actually make the board make sense a lot of the time. So this is part of that, I think. I had one quick thought, which was like when we came into the board, this concept of minimal viable board, there was a little bit of an eye-opener at that point, which was like, conceptually it's great, but practically and operationally, actually it's an aspirational goal. And part of making the board a more functional space is to just make it more minimal and more minimal viable with each cycle. And we saw that when we took the board jerseys from Sylvia and Billy and Rob. Well, Rob was still there, but Sylvia and Billy, the board was huge when they started, and minimal viable board was invented as a concept, and the board was significantly smaller by the time they left. And so then for us, it was like, how do we make it more minimal and more minimal and more minimal? So it's sort of like changing the framing from here's this thing that you're stepping into that's already minimal viable, and here's a concept that you're going to have to grow over time, or reverse grow, degrow.
And not mistaking, I think one of the things as well I found is like not mistaking minimum viable for minimum effort, because it takes a lot of effort to get this stuff done, and there's just so much room to progress, and it's kind of like time boxing the amount of and just boxing the amount of effort you want to put into improving this and how much time you want to give it, because it will take any and all of it. And I think the minimum viable as a aspiration is really key, and it's kind of just trying to understand what parts of the current role of the board, what roles is the board currently playing that's not part of that, and where's the trajectory to kind of shift that out of the board as activity as well. And I think I'm getting more clarity around that slowly, which is like working groups that have not yet been waiting to pick up tasks or take on responsibilities for pockets of work. I think that's one aspect of that.
How's your
any questions?
I'm curious about like what gets in the way of the minimum. So like there's one thing I can imagine where you've just got a legacy and it's kind of hard to decouple finances and things like that. And so it's been this process of finishing things up. But like from having just caught up with the board stuff recently, it's obvious like one of the decisions that's come up is about this comms thing and the website and this and that. And I'm like, that's clearly not minimum. It's got nothing to do with legal compliance. It's just a sense of like, well, if we're a high quality organization, obviously we have a website, and we haven't yet energized the network enough to like take it on. So we're just gonna have to deal with that. And like, I can understand the instinct to do that. Like you say, Bart, I think that's a really crucial point, that this will take as much energy as you want to put it. Like it's an infinitely large job if you're not careful. But yeah, can we hear a bit more about the obstacles to being minimal? If those are the two categories, or if there's more, or like, yeah, what gets in the way?
I can go. I think there's two interesting dynamics. One is really your human, which is if you put 4 Enspiral members or 4 community members into a room together with a solid rhythm of commitment, like, okay, we're directors of an entity and we're board members or whatever, and we sit down and we have this rhythm, naturally, just through the fact that those 4 humans or 5 humans are interacting, a bunch of context gets shared and created, and you sort of get that feeling of like, oh, I'm doing Enspiral stuff, and then there's a bunch of energy that goes with that. And so it's a real interesting and like precise challenge to work out of that energy, which is the minimal governance energy, and which is the 4 of us as friends or excited community members in a room, just like sharing context, surfacing stuff, and then wanting to action it. So a lot of the time, the impulse was like, it's happened, and then somebody needs to hold the minimal rope or keep that perspective and call it out and say, that's not quite right. So there's that element, which is a constant ongoing organic gardening task. And then the other side of it, I think, is a little bit more slippery, which is there needs to be some sort of coherence in the group about which battles to fight. Like, do you fight the battle of like constantly pushing it out to the network saying, sort out a comms working group so that they can deal with the website? And is that more or less energy than just saying, we'll just tick it off? And that's totally a slippery slope. But just being cognizant of it is important. And then the other part that goes with that is different mental models about what is actually core to keeping the compliance and the risk of the organization going. So with Enspiral Foundation, the compliance and the financial health of the organization is based on membership. And so there's a frame of like, what does it take to make sure that our membership is safe and getting value and continuing to sign up or continuing subscriptions going. And that can easily bleed out as well. So for example, having a newsletter, having a website could fall into that.
I'm just thinking about like replaying that scenario if I was in the board seat, and I wonder if it would even make sense to, okay, you have this discussion and you have someone with the minimum hat and they go like, maybe it's easier if we just do it, like, but even then I wonder if it could be strategic to go, okay, we're going to stand up the comms working group, and it's going to be all the same members who are currently on the board, and we're going to do this one thing, and then we're going to say like, we're leaving, and it's like, now here is a group and it's empty and it needs your attention. We've got the ball rolling, and to signal like, this is not board work. This is the board is not interested in the website. Like, it's not relevant. But we've done it anyway because we've got energy, and now is a great opportunity for someone else to lead, because the risk is that we model, oh, the board is the place that fixes things and fills the gaps and like puts out fires, which like that's not minimum. That's like an essential ingredient.
If I add to that, well, so you go, Charlie, if you like. Or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Within it kind of is like time allocation as well. And if you're purely leaving your board time purely for the board meetings, you just start fighting whatever turns up for the board meetings. Then the minimizing activity that you talk about, like, and it's like choosing those strategic things that you think, oh, here's something and here's a pathway in which we can take this off our plate. Whether or not standing up a working group is the right solution, who knows? But there needs to be some work, and that work happens outside of the board meetings. That's generally not stuff that happens. The other thing that I've found really kind of makes things not minimal is when, and it's kind of what Ant's pointed at, but it's just like when the board starts trying to solutionize anything in that 2-hour meeting that you've just got to like smack that on the head and be like, if we're trying to solve something, something's not happening, because we should just be signing things off, basically. And so if there's any solutionizing happening, it's not board work. It's like you've put your members' hat on and you've tapped into that. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I think you've just tapped on the thoughts I had. Is that my observation of the danger of the board is that they've become default decision makers. So I guess having looked at your experience, yeah, where do you draw the line and then compartmentalize? All right, well, us four, as Rich was saying, we could actually just solve this, but at a different time, and we'll just take care of it since no one else is doing this. Yeah, how visible do you make that default decision making? And then have you found in your pattern of meeting, do you also like set aside a bit of extra time just to connect more generally as members, just because you're meeting frequently in that way? Is that part of your regular rhythm?
I think for me, the regular rhythm meeting stuff happens in the check-ins. Generally, we have really awesome check-ins. And then there's sometimes a drink that happens afterwards. But like the check-ins we give it as much time as it needs because there's only a few people there. And so we can kind of do them properly. And then we might have a drink or a beer after. But come like 2 hours of that activity, you're pretty fried at the end of it and you're kind of sick of it. Sometimes if it's like intense. Yeah, that'd be my good. I've forgotten your first question, Charlie. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess the first question was, have you come to, I guess, yeah, if I was to formalize it in a question, have you come to a pattern of deploying stuff out to the network that you have decided that's not your territory?
I personally think we haven't got a very clear route on that. I think it's better. I don't think it's clear enough. I think there's plenty of room for improvement on that. I think we're giving more clarity of like how proposals are supposed to come to the board and what the board's role is on saying yes or no to something. I think that's at like 50% clarity. Like I think there could be a lot more improvement, but in terms of pushing things out to the network and getting action, I'd say we're at 10%.
I would double click on that and I'd say if there was one big, really, really good thread for the incoming board to kick ass, it would be work out how to do that part well. So it's like the board meeting finishes and there's some signal that goes out really, really clearly. And it could be as simple as a little video or something that you create, like something that we just weren't quite able to do. That makes it super, super fucking clear, which is like, as members, this is what, or as shareholders or shared holders or as members or whatever, these are the key things. I think two things that we tried and occasionally were quite successful was interfacing when the Catalyst and the Catalyst working group were getting going. And specifically that was because like Joshua was really proactive and John was pretty proactive. And so we were able to like interface some stuff to them to operationalize it like top down or through the mechanisms that we have. And the other thing that we did that was kind of successful a couple of times, Bart did it really well, was push some stuff out to the members meetings. And it was more cultural stuff. And from that, a few things kickstarted that are still going, like the Enspiral meetups that happen every month in Wellington. So it was like, those were two really good signals. But if you can create something that's a little bit more scalable and maybe distance orientated, I would highly, highly recommend that.
There's one other thing I'd say, that one thing, like when there's urgency, like dire urgency, generally involving lack of cash in the network, like these things, the way the balancing of the books things happen, it was like board was like, we want to get out, there's also no money, big problems to solve, people need to solve them, not us. and then suddenly there's a whole new board suddenly that steps up and everyone's engaged. It takes real disaster to get anyone engaged generally in the board. And I think that's something that if there was a clearer pathway of engagement and different like levels of thresholds that you're kind of like pushing it through, and you're making that really transparent to everyone that you've gone through this escalation process.
I think our biggest disaster, right?
Books and so it was being the kind of board working group and really smashing the balancing the books work, and that made a huge difference when we had that direct link into the people doing.
I think what the point Bart was making when he was chopping out was that we had at one point when I came in with a lot of energy, I was also doing execution work. So the board for that period of transition had a good context on what the operational stuff was happening on in the network. I think Charley stepping to the board's going to actually help that role significantly as well, because so much of our confusion in board meetings was like confusion around numbers, and it was like, oh, I wish Charley was in the room. And now you will be. And so I think you'll have a natural role in helping like clean up that system too. So that feels pretty positive. That's what you're trying to say, right, Bart? Like with the execution stuff? You just chopped out, that's all.
Yep, that was it. Yep.
You were going to go, Charley.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a thought that I wonder, it sounds like maybe something useful for us is to treat something like it's a disaster so that we have a lot of energy to take the board in a really minimal direction.
Just to double click on that, disaster, I'm not sure that's quite right, but it's like the signal. Like Billy and Sylvia did a good job of calling an all-day members meeting to talk about the situation. And from that, a whole bunch of action happened. And thinking back in time, there was a lot more centralized energy in Wellington, but some equivalent of that, or those signals that you can create, which can make it feel like, shit, there's something moving, could be really good.
So I can already see here that I've got a role, which is like, I mean, the network is really evolving in a beautiful way when it comes to comms. Like with Alina and Nat and Jory, I'm like, there's a really great pulse of communication coming through now. And so like, I think it'd be easy for us, like, even if we time box at the end of every board meeting that there's 10 minutes to just like reflect for a minute and go like, what's a 3-minute video we want to put out to the network, or like I can write a little summary or something like that. And so it's like, there's this baseline reporting, this is what's happening, or like, these are the things that we're thinking about. These are just some of the questions that we're chewing on. And then occasionally we can escalate and say, hey, it's one of those all hands on deck moments. We really need you to pay attention. Someone's going to have to take, like we can inform some other members that are going to run some process or whatever it's going to be. But yeah, I think the comms thing is like, it's starting to stabilize now, and people understand like that's the main way to keep up to date with things. So like we can just put some effort into it, because I think what we've had so far is like the disaster is loud enough to get everyone's attention, but anything lower than that, it's kind of been like gets lost in all the mess, and so like it's hard to get people to engage. But now I think we've got this reliable, steady state of like, yeah, there's going to be news at least every month that's going to like, it's going to be useful, and it's really like synchronizing people's attention.
I think it's an awesome idea. I also think it'll help to demystify a little bit more, or continue the constant demystification work that needs to go on, which is around what the board does and doesn't do. I remember a couple of times when we were organizing the co-budget round and trying to work out how much money was in the co-budget and how to frame that. We filmed a little bit of that and shared it because Rob had some really good ideas, and just the act of doing that helped sharpen our thinking up completely. So I don't know, I think that's super good to even just create that as an ongoing rhythm, where the last 10 minutes of the meeting is just thinking about what the 3 minutes that you'll share will be.
I have to jump off in a minute. I wonder if that's a good place to wrap, or if there's any last bubbling things.
I'm just noticing that Bart put together, or the board / everyone has put together quite useful introductory document, and it's almost like a working group dashboard that deploy like sort of spiders off into about 10 different documents to be familiar with. So yeah, I'm familiar with some of them, but I do feel a responsibility to go through and like sort of review that stuff. So maybe that could be part of our first meeting, is sort of an orientation around how some of that stuff has been useful for you, or what's not, or what could be better, because that might highlight something that, like, to the Optimi team, like how we could be reporting to the board better, or like it might help focus what we need to gather in better ways from people.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good idea. I think the key document that I would pay attention to is the spreadsheet that has the minutes and the actions in it. Coming into the board for the first time, that was basically the one document I paid attention to between meetings. So I would try and focus some attention there. And Susan knows that really well, so she'll be a good thread of continuity between that. And then from there, you can iterate and keep it as simple as possible. And one document's good because you have one document.
Great. Bart, just to bring you in, Rich is going to go in a minute. And so he just put a call out for any last rounding thoughts on this discussion.
Go hard and make it better. Please make it better.
I've actually got a last thought, which is I've just announced, I put up a Limio thread. You know, Phoebe announced yesterday that we're doing all this community building work in Enspiral, and I've just launched a thread saying there's a whole governance side to this, and modeling. This is not the board's problem. There's 4 members who have signed up for a formal working group, and we may eventually like need some specific responsibilities and powers. We might need to change the agreements. We're not sure, but like this is going to happen in a formal working group, and it was really great to see that we actually have the agreements we need to be able to do that kind of governance work in a self-organizing way. So I think that's going to be, I hope that's going to be a pattern for others to follow as well. Like here's a specific domain of responsibility that you can trust the 4 of us to look after. And the board might check in with us once in a while and just check that we're not, you know, doing anything non-compliant. But it seems like a good healthy pattern.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that sort of sums up to me is that you're stepping into a role in a very generative space. There's no scarcity. The biggest challenge is getting the reporting right, so you know exactly how much money's in the bank account and how much you can give away. And it's definitely a place of the problems to solve are all positive problems to solve. So it's exciting, and I think just the fact that you might have some headspace to light the rocket under the comms and under the signal building for the network is super powerful, and that will be like a really good contribution outwards to other communities as well about how to do this governance stuff well. It's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy thing without being a hierarchy.
Once I one of the things I was looking to get to but never kind of got to was like this infographic thing that we'll just push out after every meeting of like, here are the basic things that we need to know, and that we could just push out and have it somewhat engaging to the community so that everyone's always kind of aware of what the hell is going on. And it's trying to, because I feel like there's context sitting in the board that's not out in the community, and there's no reason for that to be within the board. It's just it's a bit of a comms thing. Hence the kind of, I guess, the forecasting and the minutes kind of changing form a little bit, trying to be a little bit more data heavy or have a bit more information in them.
A 3-minute video and a dashboard with 6 numbers could be an amazing intervention.
Cool. I'm excited about that because and Rich has been a steady follower of my little financial posts with little graphics. So I would love the guidance for what looks good and what's useful. And just to bring Nancy and Susan into this conversation, who aren't here as well, I really look forward to just getting their guidance and expertise in being on the board, and I know that Nancy has, from what I understand, good experience with other organizations as well. So I'm just, since this is my first time on a board, I'll be looking forward to just soaking in lots of governance context.
Yeah, you guys will be awesome. I believe Richard has to go, so should we end this call?
I have a proposal, just to start in the right direction. Would you all be comfortable with me just throwing this recording on YouTube and sharing it with the network?
I think that's
I'm
why we
okay
did
with
it,
it.
isn't it?
Great, look at that, boom, bam.